Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls of all ages. There's basically a couple of, there's a list of intended outcomes of all this sort of thing, right? And probably top of the list is to pique your interest and get you motivated to work on your Hebrew reading and your Hebrew reading skills, right? Incredibly important. It's the key to the door, right? You don't need me to tell you that sort of stuff.
Don't have the key.
It's electronic today anyway. You just, wave something in the direction the door opens. The other is specific to this piece of learning from the Mea Shilach, one of the great Hasidic masters, and that is to equip yourself with a list of 8 habits to be the most spiritual people you can possibly be. Right? So that's what he's ultimately talking about. And in order to get into the text of the Mea Shilach, we've got to read a couple of other things, and that's where we started last time. We were looking at Sefer Shemot, the book of Exodus, chapter 28, the list of the 8 garments that the high priest wore in the temple. Book of Exodus, chapter 28, Parshat Tetzaveh, and that's where this mimer of the Rabbi comes out. So we did last time also what you'll see in the handout with the English the portrait handout as opposed to the landscape one. On page number 4 is actually where we started with the summary list of what the 8 habits are according to moi. You are perfectly entitled to go through this journey and then read the 8 habits somewhat differently, because the Rebbe of Ishbitz does exactly the same thing. If you want to continue this whole derech and this series, the next text that we would come up with is the one that comes before it in the book, where he reads 5 things from the 8 garments. He seems to ignore 3 others. Then there's about 3 or 4 more texts in the same book that give a number of different lists. And what we would end up with is, I think, about the 5th or the 6th list, where he gives you, based on the temple furniture and appurtenances and tools rather than the high priest stuff, a list of questions that you get asked after you have passed out of this world. Right? It's a standard sort of Gemara thing, and very well known that you say it at funerals. This was my eulogy for my late father, actually, who passed away on Shabbat HaGadol. What are the questions that you get asked after you've left the world? And can you make a check mark against all of them? And, the old guy did. So, but that's not why he's telling you this. He's going to give you this whole story to say, live with these things in mind, maybe knowing that you're going to be tested, or that if you do it right, you're going to have a great life. But here we're focusing on 8 things, 8 habits that you should have, and they are based on the 8 garments of the high priest, which brings me to the second handout, which is the landscape one. This is one that I sat up all night with, or close to, and I like lists, and I'm really quite obsessive. And I'm not 100% sure this is entirely correct and perfect. There's 2 sides to it. I included the 7 habits from Stephen Covey's book, if you want to compare that or contrast that. And you should end up at the end of this and the next session with a list of 8 things and a means of remembering them and keeping them in mind. You can do this through several different routes. One that I think I would use is putting on the 8 garments in the order that the priest put them on. And that's the second list at the top of the other side of that page. You obviously put the pants on first, and here's where we're going to get into the issues of, we really do need to have a bit of Hebrew skills, because some of the words just don't have translations. right? I put them out in English. So, how do you say an ephod in English? How do you say a tzitz in English, right? And you look up these Hebrew words on Google and Google Translate, you look at them in Morphix, and the ephod is translated as ephod.
Not as an apron?
Some of them will do this. The thing I got for ephod was actually surplice. If you've ever been to a Catholic or an Anglican church.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because the whole idea of 8 habits and the 8 garments,
Right.
I thought of...
That is a good one, actually. That is a good pun,
What
Aaron.
do you think of?
Thank you.
What
That is
a nun wears, they call that... What a nun wears, they call
Oh,
it a
really?
habit.
none is
I
good
didn't
habit.
even
Oh,
know
not
that.
habit.
Right.
I didn't even know
So
that.
something to do with garments, I don't know
Right.
why they call it habit.
So if you do go to the internet, and
I
you
know
look
that
up,
the
yeah,
women of the Islamic persuasion, they were Habib. So
Right.
that Habib and habit may be connected as some kind of a trend.
yeah, we gotta
Just guessing.
spend a little bit of time on this sort of stuff. If you go to the internet and look up the garments of the high priest, you will see that they do have significant descendants in the Mormon Church. These are Latter-day Saints friends have special attire that they wear to go to their services, right?
And you got it from us?
It's descendant. It descends from it. And also the various garments that you see Catholic and Anglican priests, bishops, and the Pope, the sort of stuff that they put on, there's a pretty good resemblance and there's a very clear line of descent. So you get into English names. And one of the things that a priest wears today is called a surplice, which is actually a sort of frilly lace over thing. I don't know. It's like a woman's slip that gets worn on the outside, or the sort of lacy dress you would wear with with something underneath it, right? That doesn't really
Doesn't cut it.
it doesn't cut it. It doesn't cut it because it doesn't really resemble how these things are. I've downloaded some of the pictures. If you want later on, we can take a look at them. But the Temple Institute website is worth looking at. The easiest place to start remembering and to start looking at that is the prayer before the Shema, right? So this is again we looked at this last time, but it's worth taking a look at because if you are among those people who do the morning service every day, right, you have got this memorized. Weekday Shacharit, blessings of the Shema, second blessings before the Shema, right? A time of intense focus in the davening, in the service of worship. With great love you have loved us, O Lord our God, super abundant compassion, etc., etc., etc. Right? So what we then continue here is saying at the third or the fourth line into that second prayer right before the paragraph of the Shema. Avinu ha'av harachaman, our Father, our King, hamurachem, merciful, and rachem aleinu, be merciful to us, v'tein b'libeinu, put into our hearts a list of 8 things. And that is where the Mea Shiloach is going to start. He's going to say, here are these 8 things. Give us the ability to...
Talk about the morning Shema.
Yeah, just
Before Shachar.
No,
Shachar,
no,
no.
it's part of the Shachar. It's
Shachar.
not the first
In
Shema,
Shachar,
the
Yeah.
not the
second.
first.
Right, it's not the Leolam
It's the
Yehi
second.
Adam.
Not the morning
Shema.
breakfast.
No,
The very,
second,
very, yeah.
The second.
Yeah,
The second Shema.
right.
Okay.
Right, it's the second... Yeah. Ahavat
This is
Olam,
already,
Ahavat. We're well into the service. We've woken up.
you think so?
You have to-
No,
Okay.
I am totally not a morning person, and I'm not awake during davening.
Here we go.
But
You're the full-
these things should be in your mind. And this is, I think, where Reb Mordechai Yosef of Ishbitz is really starting from here. He's saying, and he says that he does this in a lot of different places. Here's a list of things that you know off by heart already. Right? You've been davening, you've been reading these prayers every day for as long as you've been reading them. So you've got this list of 8 things. You got it in your head. Start here, then start meditating on that. What does it mean? What can I use this for? And how can I expand this into a list of stuff that's going to be really useful in my life? If you happen to have gone to a school where they taught you what are the garments of the high priest, what are the furniture and utensils of the temple, I didn't go to that sort of school.
I don't think any school ever teaches the furniture.
Yeah, there was a school in England. I did this class
really?
with at Shir Chadash a while back, and one guy says, "Yeah, I know these things."
Oh, really?
There are such schools, and there are people who are privileged to go to these schools, but not all of us grew up observant or even interested in these things. I think the picture of different garments, once you have it clear what the actual item of clothing is, can be quite valuable. Because I put on my pants, I put on my tunic, I put on my robe, I put on my plate, I put on my belt, right? And that is certainly a way of visualizing it. So this is useful as a visualization or as a meditation process. You sit down and say, I'm putting on my pants metaphorically, and this is what I'm thinking about. I'm putting on my tunic, my ketonet. I still haven't got completely clear which of the outer garments goes on first. I'm putting on the belt because that's an easy one. I'm taking my heart and my emotions under control. Right? So back to the Siddur, which is where we started. And that's where the Rabbi of Ishbitz is starting. God says, please give us lahavin, to understand, lahaskil, to be wise. What's the difference between the two? He's going to tell us what he wants us to know from this and the difference. Lishmoa, to listen, lilmod, to learn, lilamed, to teach, lishmor, to keep, laasot, to do, ulekayem, and to preserve all the words of the study of your Torah with love.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Got it?
Yeah.
Right? And we spent quite a bit of time looking at Exodus 28, and it's on the top of page 3 in the handout. I've just put in the relevant verses. You got 1, 2, 3 verses that are relevant. The verse in Job we'll get to, because this is a biggie in terms of what he's going to be saying. All right? So, I think this chart is reasonably correct. You are very welcome to correct me on it, but I am reasonably certain it's reasonably close to being correct. I try not to be too certain about things, and that's one of the major teachings of the Mea Shilach. Don't ever think you know it all, right? And don't ever imagine that the way you think is the way someone else should think, right? Very, very quick aside, 10 Commandments, one of the most potent teachings of the Rebbe of Ishbitz that there is. Do not make a pesel or a tmuna. Do not make for yourselves a carved image or a painted or drawn image to worship, right? One of the 10 Commandments, don't worship idols. What does that mean? Zohar says this refers to positive commandments and negative commandments, right? How on earth can that make any sense? And the Ishbitzer says, do not make your observance or your way of observing a commandment, whether positive or negative, an object of idolatrous worship for yourself or other people. I keep this mitzvah this way. You do not have to bow down to my keeping this mitzvah this way. All right? Someone else does it differently. That's huge. That's huge. And that's why we learn Chassidus, right? Okay. We're going to do a little bit of Gemara, whether we like it or not. We are going to learn some Gemara here from the Talmud Bavli, and that's the first one on where it says the 8 garments on the top. Bavli Arachin 16a. This is the text where all the garments of the high priest are put together and associated with something in particular that people do. The Talmud itself starts, Rabbi Ani ben Sasson said, why is this portion about the priestly garments placed next to the portion about the sacrifices? is to tell you that just as the sacrifices procure atonement, so do the priestly garments. Right? This is from the old Sensino Talmud translation, so it's sort of old-fashioned British English. But he's telling you something very, very straightforward here. That throughout the Bible, there are things that are put next to each other. And there's a reason, right? Over and over and over again, the laws of A are put next to the laws of B. The laws of C come after the story of D. There's a reason for it, right? The sacrifices are given and brought in the temple to reach atonement for the Jewish people, and of course anyone else as well, who have done particular sins. Similarly, the high priest's garment. Right? Another way of looking at it is these are things that the priest should be thinking about when he's out there with his formal garments on. But each of them represents something, and most of them are pretty straightforward and easy to figure out. The numbers here correspond to the numbers of the words in the prayer before the Shema. Right? I know this is a little bit much to, I'm not mathematically minded. I don't do well with numbers of anything. I can't balance a checkbook. But counting things is the way it goes. And the numbers are to understand, to be wise, to listen, to learn, etc. That's 1 through 8. And that's where I start, because that's the easy one, and that's the one I have in my head. So that number here is the correspondence, right? The order, I don't think matters at all. The ultimate goal is that you take one of these lists and it starts to make sense with you, and that's not my phone. Good.
But this list you have is the list the way the Gemara.
This page here is exactly the way the Gemara starts. Kitonet michnasayim mitznefet, tunic, pants, mitre. Whereas the key words from the prayer before the Shema goes understand, be wise, listen, learn.
What do the numbers mean? Because it's not in order.
Yeah, it's not in order.
6, pence, or 8.
If you look, there's at least 3 ways of ordering these. And to use my son's expression, whatever floats your boat, whatever will work for you to be able to have this in your head. Numbers 1 through 8 are the lists from the prayer before the Shema. Right? And that's what I'm going to call the prime list. Right? The Star Trek prime universe, as opposed to the Kelvin Star Trek universe. Right? Hillel knows what I'm talking about. Good. They're very close. They're very close. But not, one doesn't exclude the other.
I would just mention, from the historical point of view, the Anshe Knesset Gadol wrote the Nusach, the text for the Shema, a few hundred years before the rabbis wrote this list
right.
in the Talmud. Unless this was already an old tradition in this fashion and that was just repeated over. We don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I honestly don't think that there certainly isn't an obvious connection between the lists from the prayer before the Shema and the list of the garments, right? I mean, it's something that that Reb Nosson says, right? Reb Nosson Breslev. It's the introduction to Likutei Halachot, and he says people ask him, where does all this Chassidut stuff come from? Because you're taking Gemaras, you're taking passages from the Bible, the Talmud and Halacha, and you're putting them to completely new and novel meanings and applications. Where are you getting this from? And he answers by saying it's a kernel of truth that was there at the very beginning. We're not dealing here with Shakespeare. Right? This isn't just, great literature. This is Torah. This is Torah, and all of it comes from Har Sinai. All of it comes from God. And the expression that we might be familiar with today is God planted Easter eggs. It's not the best expression. You familiar with the term? No. You get a piece of software, and you think it does all sorts of things. But there's a gift for you in there, and it does something else as well. you download an album from iTunes, right? None of us download without paying, right? Actually, I'm Canadian and it's permitted to do in Canada by Supreme Court decisions. I download an album, it's got 10 songs on it. There's a free gift. The performer, the singer, is giving me an 11th song. There's stuff that is programmed into the Torah itself that comes out at a time when it's needed. Hasidism, the Baal Shem Tov, Reb Nosson, Reb Mordechai Yosef, every one of them. These are pieces of Torah that were originally intended and written in deep into the code of the Chumash. Here we're talking about 5 books of Moses and description of what is supposed to be in the temple and the Mishkan. That it was originally coded into there and just the time had to come around for this to be revealed. I think that makes sense because I'm one of those people who believes that God gave us this Torah. And books of Chassidut, the Hasidic masters wrote books that are completely magical and reach out and grab you. And this sort of stuff reaches out and grabs me. Right? And we're talking about positive experiences here. We're not going to talk about the more difficult stuff that hits you and gives you a good kick where you need to be hurt, because you need to have something really forced on you and to be told something in a forceful and painful way. Because some of these books can hurt you. They can make you feel very, very unhappy, but unhappy because, wow, I missed out on doing that. I should be at that level and I'm not. Right? Right? So let's learn this little bit of Gemara here, which the Ishbitzer is going to then take and tell us that there's a life lesson for that in here. All right? Okay. First one is easy. The tunic, the ketonet, procures atonement for bloodshed. As it is written in Book of Bereshit, they dipped the coat in blood. You remember the story of Joseph and his brothers. They pretended that he was dead and had been torn apart by a wild animal, dipped the coat in blood, and brought it to their father and said, our brother has been devoured by a wild beast, whereas they had sold him for cash. They wanted to get rid of him, right?
You want a new pair of shoes.
I wish they used to buy shoes. Yeah, Yom Kippur stuff. That's the Yom Kippur afternoon talk about where this comes up. Interesting stuff, but we're going to try and focus because this is about being focused, right? So the ketonet, the tunic, atones for bloodshed. This is something that we are going to have to get into. Killing. We don't. Most of us don't kill people on a regular basis, right? But there's going to be a broader meaning to it. Michnasayim, the trousers, the breeches, procure atonement for incest, as is written. Exodus 28.
Most of us don't do incest.
Chas v'shalom.
Even though it's a game the whole family can play.
Right, totally not. And I'm sure all of us are perfectly chaste and good people, right? The linen pants are to cover the flesh of their nakedness, which is the verse directly referring to making these pants out of linen, right? Good material to make stuff for a hot climate, but not just to keep them comfortable in the heat, but to cover their erva, to cover their genitalia, and to keep their libido under control, right? Really, really easy one. Mitznefet, the hat. Miter, procures atonement for those of arrogant mind. Now we're getting a Gemara source. Rabbi Chanina said that that which is placed high procure atonement for acts of haughtiness. It's on the top of your head. It's to do with lifting yourself and placing yourself above people. The next one is the avnate. which this translation calls a girdle, although it is actually very much like the gartel that men wear today, but much thicker, and actually 32 cubits long. So that is what, about 15 meters or so. It was a very, very long and clearly cumbersome cummerbund, right? Procures atonement for sinful thoughts of the heart.
Doesn't give you the width though. Only the length.
Some to Lisa
It's. I can show you the picture of it.
But do they give you the width?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Somebody told me it was a Lisa tefach.
I don't think so.
Tefach.
That's what somebody told me.
But why does it matter?
Well, once you talk about the length, then
It matters.
A meter?
Now, what is the significance if it was 5 centimeters
Mhm.
deep?
How heavy it was.
So
It's,
that's a tefach,
yeah, I mean,
15 meters.
you don't see it when it's on the actual Kohen Gadol
Because it's underneath.
because it's underneath a bunch.
Correct,
It's
correct,
underneath a
yes.
bunch of things,
Yeah.
right?
But
So
this separates his top half from his bottom half.
they're not bringing that notion up at all.
Not at all.
Not at all. What they're saying is the pants do that. The pants keep your bottom half,
Well-
your animal half under control.
Well, no, I think the pants. Are we supposed to be discussing this or not?
You're very welcome to discuss
I
this.
think the pants. All the pants do is keep your pants on. But
Yeah.
I think the
Part.
garter or what we call here the girdle. This separates your heart and your lungs, which are your life part of your body, from your liver and your kidneys and your digestive system, which are a process part of the body. It's two separate, distinctly separate functions within the body.
Yeah, I think
One is a life and the other is a waste.
No, but how high up was the girdle worn? Look at the note 18. The girdle was supposed to have been wide enough to cover his heart. Okay, doesn't mean it's covering it. It means it's tefach. But why does it say
from
wide
the
enough
from the
to cover
pic,
his
from the
heart?
picture that from the one photograph of it in the Temple Institute, and they actually have one there on a model that you can see. It went around your middle, and it went around and around and around and around, and it sort of was like from your waist up to where your middle of your chest. Cummerbund, right? I have never worn one in my life, and probably never will. But
Well,
this
because you never worked for the Ethiopian, for the East African.
probably true. I'm not civilized, so you know.
Okay.
It's to do with keeping the heart and the emotions under control.
Under control.
And
Not as a separation.
not as a
between life and
separation
waste.
from the top to the bottom, the higher functions to what we might call the lower functions.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's exactly the very first line that he does, and also measures 32 cubits, which is lamed bet, lave, heart. The choshen, the breastplate, right? There's no other word for it. Procures atonement for errors in legal decisions.
That's right.
That's
There's no word like a choshen mishpat, so the
Exactly.
of judgment.
Judgment.
exactly and precisely. And thou shalt make a breastplate of judgment is what the Torah tells us exactly there. The reference is very specific there in the verse. The judgment, I think, is a reference to the Urim v'Tumim that either were inside it or were part of it, right? Oh, you've got, yeah, if you have the art scroll thing, you've got the whole drawing there. Right? The choshen, the breastplate thing, either had something inside it or in and of itself was a means of getting a final yes or no answer to some very, very serious questions. There's a lot of information on it, but we don't know exactly what it was. Again, going back to the Temple Institute's drawings and stuff, they have him using it in, I forget which is which, but one of the opinions says the stones on the breastplate would light up. And either the priest could then read off what was on it, because they would light up in a certain way, and each one represented a letter, and each one had the name of a tribe on it. So he could read that off, or he would go into a certain type of mystical trance and was able to understand what was being said. That they would get a set of what you and I would see as random letters and combinations of colors, but the priest at a higher level of conscience could read that. That seems to be what they're putting into that picture there. Questions like, and this is what we have from Nach, from the Bible itself, should we go to war or not? Which of the tribes of Israel should be the first to go to battle against the particular nation? Battling the Philistines, the Canaanites, or whatever it happens to be. So real serious questions. That's probably what the text is referring to, but in general, the Choshen Mishpat is here taken to be legal decisions. Right? The volume of the Shulchan Aruch that's called Choshen Mishpat deals with what?
Legal decisions?
Legal decisions.
So if there was a mistake by the Beit Din, this would somehow atone for the mistake?
Yeah. Yeah. The kavana, the intent of the high priest had to be to do all of these things. To put these clothes on with enormous significance and the weight of the entire nation of Israel on his shoulders, literally, and achieve atonement, and at the same time give out good energy for all of these areas of the lives of our people. Right? Ephod. There really isn't a good word for an ephod. It's an ephod. I don't really know what an aleph pei daled is. I don't think there's a verb even in Hebrew to aleph pei daled. It's a difficult source. It's Hosea chapter 3 verse 4, and it's rereading a particular verse of a particular time in the history of the Jewish people, that because there was no ephod worn by the priest, there were idols in the country. It's his reading of it. It's not there in the Mefarshim. This is the Mea Shilach, Rabbi Mordechai Yosef Lehner of Ishbitz. We're entirely and completely in the Torah of the Rebbe of Ishbitz right now.
This is the Gemara, though.
Yeah, this is the Gemara.
So that's the source.
That's the source of this, yeah. It doesn't entirely make sense if you open it up in the context, but it's putting things together. You have a word in the context of another word, and they're together and they have a certain amount of meaning. Is everything going to stand up to a very critical examination? Not necessarily. I think one of the things that I take from and that I use in my reading of all of the great Hasidic masters is the point is the point. He's making a point, and if 9 out of 10 of the points that get him to the big point make sense,
so
fine.
You assume that you just didn't grasp the 10th.
I didn't grasp completely the context. Robe, the me'il, procures atonement for slander. For the Holy One, blessed be, he said, let that which emits a sound procure atonement for an act of sound. Right?
Someone who saw the last video asked me a question to ask you.
Yeah, please.
He wants to know if the word me'il is related to the word ma'al, trespass. It's the same root.
It's obviously the same root. Yeah.
But what's the connection? Is there a connection?
Is there a connection?
So that's all I might ask you.
I honestly don't have an answer to that. I don't. We have to ask Isaac Mosesson for this one. He will know this instantly.
But you have a precedent where the robe and slander were very much connected in the story of Yosef.
Go on.
Well, where Yosef basically was, to a degree, slandering his brothers, and was and the whole.
That was the first source. Ketona.
The tunic.
The tunic.
I think the robe.
No, but he had a ketonic pasim that was called ketonic.
It was.
Yeah.
But you could extend it.
Yeah, I mean it's another way of reading it, certainly, but the ketonet connects with Joseph.
Okay.
It was Joseph's coat of many colors was the ketonet.
A tunic, rather than a robe, is what
Yeah.
you're saying.
Yeah,
Here, we're talking about these small bells have some kind of audible sound. So slander is mostly audible. So that's the connection.
yeah. That's the connection here in the Gemara, and the Rabbi of Ishbitz is going to take it to a totally
But
different
I
level.
would have thought the opposite.
Go on.
That the fact that they had bells was to warn you that someone is coming, and you're not going to say anything bad if you know the Kohen Gadol is coming, a Kohen is coming, any Kohen. They wore the
Maybe
bells.
that's the connection.
So it was to warn you not to say bad.
Right. That's why it's tones for it.
Oh, I see it at times.
Interesting.
Right.
No, the question is
You're
when.
right.
No, everybody's right. Everybody's right.
There's no right or wrong, as you said.
Oh, so Rabbi.
You're just more right.
No.
Some people are more right than others, right?
4 legs good.
I'd say you're right. Slander is audible, and the bells were audible.
Right.
And the bells warned you. Just shush, we need to walk around with bells today.
Well, I think many of us do. If you like, we can learn the Sefer Chafetz Chaim. I think one of the best responses to learning anything with a group that I've ever had. In Toronto, we did this. We did the Sefer Chafetz Chaim beginning to end. Totally fascinating book.
Changed people.
It changed people, but it's also just really, really interesting. And you don't realize, and nobody realized until he came along, how important speech is and how valuable good speech is. Although we know this is stuff we know. Right?
You still have to remind us, especially now.
We've got to be reminded. And
No fun with that, listen.
Huh?
There's just no fun with that, listen.
What can
Well,
you do? You can't have fun.
there are many other means of having good kosher fun. Right? The last one in the Gemara here is the tzitz. Again, there isn't a particularly good word for that. Golden plate. Another one is crown. To call it a tiara would be sort of descriptive, but it isn't.
Yes, yeah, here it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a small plate of gold that said "Holy to God" on it, and that went on top of the mitznefet. He put on the turban or the mitre. It seemed to be more like a turban than a mitre.
Mm-hmm.
And then he put on the golden plate on top of it.
Do about the head plate, right?
Yeah, we're talking about the head
And
plate
it had
thing.
turquoise cords.
And a turquoise cords and it looked something like that.
Wow, beautiful. Well,
Right?
Oh my goodness.
And if we go to the Temple Institute, we can
I
actually
want to
see.
go take you. You have to go maybe tomorrow.
Right?
Exquisite. No.
Yeah, it's interesting stuff the way they do this, and apparently from what they say, they are ready to rock and roll.
They're ready.
That all of these utensils, garments, and stuff that they have made are simply waiting for the temple.
Kohen Gadol to come
Yeah.
down.
Yeah, to come down from heaven or however it is.
Right, come down from his perch and get dressed.
Wow.
Right, to get up out of bed and get ready.
Yeah.
Okay, it's going to take us quite a while to get through the actual text. This is the page number 2, which is in the Hebrew, and we'll at least make a start on it. It starts on page number 3 in the English. Right, I'm going to intentionally read the Hebrew as well as the English because I want to push Hebrew skills, but I also want to make certain that we get all of the nuances and shades of meaning out of the text. Okay? With the Mea Shilach, and with this particular book, it is not written by him. Right? Large percentage of the great Hasidic masters did not write the books themselves. And this is written several years after he passed on. And the students, and particularly the grandchildren, the grandson, and that one or two of the sons got together and started out with Parshat Bereshit, went through the end of Devarim, the 5 books of Moses, went through the Talmud, and wrote down the absolute essence of what he said. A few years later, they did the same. So you have a volume 1 and a volume 2. So we're here in Parshat Titzaveh, Exodus 28 or so, 29, and you've got the same Parsha in volume 1, volume 2, and then a few years later they did a volume 3 where they put together all of the material that they had not already remembered that someone else had written down in another book. There's still not a huge amount of material, but it's concentrated, and on the other hand, it's not very long-winded, right? But there are 2 versions of this, and then there's a bunch of other things. So we're going to make a little bit of a start here, and then we'll end on time, right? So Ve'ela habegadim, which is on page number 2. These are the garments that you shall make: choshen, ephod, me'il, etc., etc. Right? Hine neged hashmona begadim. He asserts very, very clearly that if there is a little bit, I'll take it. And I think we're enjoying a reasonably good allergy season for a change. Billy Ayan Hara. May the Lord keep the plants in check. That's all I need to know. Thank you, thank you. It's not difficult Hebrew.
Well, this is Rashi, not
This I did a few years ago before they brought onto Sefaria a text that's in block letters. So if you have Sefaria or you go to a bookstore, you can buy an edition of this which is in block letters.
No, but I think it's great if you can have the Rashi. Okay.
Make it easy for yourself to read. So, parallel to the 8 garments, Tiknu Anshe Knesset HaGdolah, the men of the Great Assembly, established in the blessing before the Shema these 8 things. He is saying this is the intent of the Anshe Knesset HaGdolah who formulated this prayer, that it was there from the beginning. All right, Lahavin, to understand, Lahaskil, to be wise, Lishmoa, to listen, Lilmod, to learn, Lilamed, to teach, Lishmor, to keep, Vilasot, and to do, Ulakayem, and to uphold. We'll do one of the pieces here, and then we'll call it quits because there are folks waiting. Lahavin, this is the easy one. To understand, Uneged ha'avnet. This parallels the belt or the sash. Ki avnet mechaper al hirhur halev. Because as we just learned in this piece of Gemara, he's putting everything together. The one word from the list of 8 in the prayer before the Shema, to understand, is parallel to the avnet, to the belt, which atones for hirhur halev, fantasies of the heart. Avigam levishato haita al halev, and it was worn on the heart. Not like a belt that we wore today, but like
an error in the, is this gam or gas?
I think it's a mem, v'gam. Yeah. Umidato haya gam kein lamed bet amot, and it was 32 amot, which is the word for lathe. Right? understand, remove fantasies of the heart, which if you look at page number 4, I've taken this to say the habit that you should adopt is stop being a Walter Mitty. Don't let your imagination rule your life. Right? We all have things that we project onto other people, onto ourselves, right? Something from my childhood or whatever it is, or something from how I perceive myself, how I think other people are looking at me. Don't live in a fantasy world.
That's a good start.
That's a good start. There are 7 more. To be continued.